Hi online, Zoomers, Zoomsters, as I like to call them. All right. Well, it's nice to see you all. It's nice to hear the sounds of Sangha. Yeah. And welcome to Mountain Stream. My name's Adam, Stonebraker. And if you haven't been here before, welcome. The rhythm of this is we do a meditation, then we take a little break, and then I offer some Dharma words, and then we have a Q&A, and then some metta and some announcements. So it's a whole night of fun. Yeah. So let's start. And so we begin just by finding our seat. And so I like to just feel into the body, wiggle a little bit, if and maybe even close the eyes so you can uh, be more inwardly drawn. Maybe even stretch a little bit. And just take a few deep breaths. Yeah, let the breath become nice and natural, easeful. Sometimes when I sit, I like to just kind of quickly just sort of do a scan throughout my day. It's like maybe you've had a very full day, you know, but now you're here, you've arrived. And it can take a little time to just settle in that momentum, maybe still going forward. And so being gentle, allowing for a gradual transition. And then you might just draw attention to the seat or the feet, wherever you're meeting the earth. Just to bring a little bit of stability to the mind. And so we can begin just by having kind of a narrow attention on a particular place. And if remaining at that place, narrow attention is supportive for you, please continue to do that. But if you'd like to, you can begin to just broaden out into the rest of the body. The attention is fully through the entirety of the body and maybe even a little bit out past it. The breath is slow and long. Might start to feel like the breath is actually expanding the body, the whole body. The exhale relaxes the body, almost like a air filling a balloon or wind filling a sail of a boat on the ocean. relax more, relaxing the efforting, the doing part. Can we bring a sense of heartfulness to this? Can we love the breath? love this body? Can we love awareness? I bring love to sitting, to the bubble in my belly, to the ridiculous story going through my head. Thank you. All right. So we'll take a little break here. Uh, yeah, so the intention tonight was to just have like a little short Dharma and do like a longer Q&A uh, session. So we'll see how that goes. Sometimes I talk a little longer, but I'll try to stop. So so we could do some Q&A, but yeah. Hmm, timer. So I'd like to talk about uh, something I've been thinking a lot about lately, which is patience, patience and perseverance. And yeah, which, I think if you could maybe uh, boil the practice down to one thing, it's probably patience. There could be one thing, you know, because even just to sit takes a lot of patience, right? Being in the world, there's a lot of patience that's required, especially when you're dealing with other people, right? But especially yourself, when you have to sit down and watch your own mind, that requires a lot of patience as well. So, just offer some reflections on that. Um, and patience is interesting because it's one of the paramitas or paramis, which in Theravada Buddhism there's 10, in Mahayana Buddhism there's 6, uh, and it's usually reversed. Usually the Mahayana like adds stuff on, but they took away. But in both, there's patience, and the Pali word for this is kanti, is the word for patience, kanti. And the paramitas it translates as perfections, and and really what the paramitas are is they're a mind training. They're things, they're qualities to perfect, is how I like to think of them. They're practices to put our attention on. And as we become more adept at them, the closer to awakening we become. Yeah. And so they're, again, a preparation of the mind for awakening. And so this word kanti, again, it's usually translated as patience, but it can also be translated as forbearance or tolerance or acceptance. And they're meant to be kind of the Buddha talked about them as like the supreme purification of the mind and the body. And he's kind of playing with the Vedic term tapas, which were kind of austere ascetic practices that you would do to purify the body. So it's really interesting when you read the Buddha. He was in a he was teaching at a time where the Vedas were the predominant religion in India. And so he used a lot of Vedic terminology. And so tapas is one of those that he uses. So this idea of purification. Um, but and the idea here is that we cleanse the mind. And we can really think of all of our whole practice as a purification of this way to clear out obstructions to get at our true nature. And so it's a training. It's something that we do over time to clear out. And I think it's really interesting that at that time, 2,600 years ago, in a time without cell phones and TVs and traffic and people, that there was still a purification of mind that had to happen. There was a practice, there was a process Uh, and so today, even more so, with all the distractions that we have, um, it's difficult to just drop into awakening. There's a gradual process, there's a clearing out that needs to happen in order to get there. And that's what the Buddhist path is all about. But really, these translations of forbearance and tolerance and patience, they kind of fall short of what Kanti really is, because all of these things sort of they kind of connote a passivity, and so Buddhists are sometimes criticized for being passive. But the Buddha wasn't passive, and Kanti is not meant to be a passivity. Um, and so to be patient could be seen as kind of silently suffering. Um, when we sit, it's a kind of a silent suffering. At least most of my sits are. There's always even the blissful sits. There's always part of them that is suffering, and I'm being patient while I sit through it. Or you think of somebody who's a patient in a hospital who can't really affect their own outcomes. They're completely reliant on other people to for the cure, or they have to wait it out or something like this. So there's this patience, this like suffering in silence. You can't. There's nothing you can do about it. Or any situation that you can't really do anything about. We think of all the suffering in the world right now and how frustrating that can be. You know, think of the situation in Gaza or, in Congo or Sudan or all these places that we really can't do much about. We're suffering for others and thinking about this, and we have no choice. There's nothing we can really do except for work on our own hearts. And then tolerance can almost imply like a neglect, like I tolerate this person. It's not the most skillful thing. So not correcting, not fixing, or complaining, but being tolerant, which Buddhism doesn't really teach that. Buddhism teaches to be skillful. So sometimes things need to be interrupted. Sometimes things need to be uh, fixed. Sometimes we need to speak up. But tolerance can also imply a broadening of the mind, which is more skillful. So one who is tolerant it can be open to views outside of their own and open to other people, and so neither condemning nor dismissing, so listening. So Kanti, this Pali word, it exceeds all of these meanings. And so I like this. So to practice is to patiently, tolerantly forbear hardships and difficulties, but not passively. Yeah. And this is kind of where perseverance comes in. So perseverance, I like to think of the yang or the yang, and patience as the yin. So there's this yielding quality of patience, but then there's a perseverance that keeps us moving forward. So when we meet difficulty, especially in our Buddhist practice when we're sitting, there's a faith aspect to it. There's a trust there. Sada is the word for faith. And so the sada, it fuels a sense of perseverance. And so I trust the teachings of the Buddha, or I trust the awakening of the Buddha, which when I want to get up from my sit, or I don't want to be patient, or I want to, hurry something, or I want to react really strongly, I can remember my commitment or my confidence and my faith in the teaching and the promises of the teaching and the fruits of the teaching, which allows me to be more patient. Yeah, so these two things kind of coming together. There's this active perseverance, and then there's a letting go and into the patience. So that's how I like to think of Kanti. It's like these two things coming together. So maybe we can think of Kanti as holding the heart still in the presence of its suffering until it lets go of the ways in which it creates its own suffering. Let me say that again. We can think of Kanti as holding the heart still in the presence of its suffering until it lets go of all the ways in which it creates its own suffering. And so the heart mind, the chitta, it's habitually creating suffering and stress through reacting to it. And so there becomes this cycle of reaction, pain, reaction, pain, reaction, pain, reaction. And so the continuously, holding on or getting caught up, this happens until we get to a point where the heart no longer shakes, it no longer sinks, it no longer lashes out. And this happens through practice. And so Kanti, patience, perseverance is a skill that we build over time. This isn't something that just arises on its own. It's something that we build. It's something that we do. And it takes less and less effort uh, the more skillful we become. And when we meet difficulty and we patiently step up to the things that are difficult, this is where the real magic of the practice happens. This is really, much of our practice can be boiled down to this, because there's this alchemical transformation. The suffering, the difficulty, the misfortune, even disasters, they transform into the path. It becomes the path, or it becomes, there's a lot of spiritual benefit that comes from this. And so for this reason, it's an especially powerful practice. And if you look at the wheel of dependent origination, um, on the way towards awakening, the second half of it, it begins with suffering. It starts with suffering. And so suffering is the catalyst that allows for awakening. So suffering is the tool. It's the practice. It's the path. Really, it's the path. And when we change our relationship with the suffering and really understand it, that's when things transform, become something different, become awakening. Ajahn Chah used to say, if suffering was such a terrible thing, uh, the Buddha wouldn't have called it a noble truth. So you could look at the example of the Buddha and Mara. So when the Buddha was under the Bodhi tree, uh, sorry, this microphone keeps falling on me. Um, it said that Mara through everything. So Mara is kind of the representation of the ego, we could say, or greed, hatred, and delusion, um, all of the distractions, all of the temptations of away from awakening. And so Mara through everything. Uh, Mara sent his daughters to tempt the Buddha and tried to scare the Buddha in all these different ways. And the Buddha faced it and was patient, persevered, because he saw into awakening. He wasn't quite awakened, but he had that memory of the rose apple tree where he had this contentment. He knew there was a place where suffering ended. And it's not really that suffering ends, it's that the relationship with suffering changes. It's not like once we awaken, the suffering just goes away. There's still suffering. It's the first noble truth. But the relationship changes. It doesn't affect the self, because the realization is that there is no self, and so there's no self to suffer. But that doesn't mean we don't suffer, um, or experience pain, I should say. And so Mara threw everything Mara could at the Buddha, and the Buddha sat patiently. And all of those things were transformed into awakening. So without that suffering, without those things, the Buddha wouldn't have become awakened. Yeah. One of the traditional chants in Theravada Buddhism is the Buddha overcame Mara through practicing Kanti. That's the method. That's how the Buddha became awakened. This is Ajahn Suchito. The Buddha overcame the forces of delusion, anger, fear, aversion, and greed through practicing patience, not through blaming anyone, ignoring those forces or running away from them. So when you're stuck in a traffic jam, an- anxious for resolution to a crisis, or beset with a migraine, it's good to remember that the Buddha was here too and found a way through. In an age where one is encouraged not to wait, but to go faster, not to accept, but to be more demanding, this parami may be the one you use most frequently to cross the floods. So that's really true. Things keep getting faster. There's more stuff always. And so when we centralize this practice, we begin to develop this a strength of character. We begin to have greater vision. We begin to have more courage, more dignity, more depth. You think of people throughout history who have endured. Nelson Mandela spent 26 years in prison, right? 26? As my teacher Kidasaro says, he turned the prison into a university. Martin Luther King, the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh. Think of what they had to endure, like tremendous suffering. And so when you see these people speak, when they just their presence alone, there's such depth, there's such dignity, there's such courage that they could face anything, but also there's this overwhelming compassion, overwhelming compassion. And I think it's because they, through their own suffering, and this is the same thing for us, you you begin to learn how profound it is to be a human being and also how to love more. Because when you have faced your own suffering and when you've faced your demons and you've kind of dug deep and you've sat and been patient and persevered, you begin to realize that every human being has the same things going on within themselves, maybe more. And so then you begin to have compassion for those other human beings. It's like a really profound thing. You learn how to love on a much deeper level when you've had the courage to face your own suffering rather than turn away. And so that's why I think these people throughout history who have endured and suffered had this really profound compassion, profound presence. In Mahayana, and it's in the Theravada as well, but it's mostly associated with the Mahayana, is the idea of the bodhisattva, and the bodhisattva is and bodhisattva just means awakened being, but bodhisattvas specifically um, are those who are on their way to Buddhahood. So the Buddha was a bodhisattva in his past lives, but also a bodhisattva is one who foregoes their own enlightenment in order to be reborn to until all beings are saved. Yeah. So they keep being reborn. They don't want to transcend because then they won't be able to save being. So many of the bodhisattvas take vows to continuously be reborn until every being is enlightened. And that's a lot of patience. Without patience, that whole project sort of falls through. And this idea of enduring and practicing and being patient, practicing meditation, generosity, sila, all these things are pretty easy when life is going well, you know? But as soon as life gets difficult or challenges come up, what are the first things to go? Meditation, generosity, sometimes sila. Many people over the years since I've been a teacher, and I I've said this as well to my teachers over the years, that my practice has dropped off, um, and when things get better, I'll get back to it. Like when life gets better, I'll get back to it. I'll get my practice back. And it's sort of the opposite. It should be the opposite. It's like when things get difficult, that's when the practice should ramp up. I think the Dalai Lama said, uh, you should meditate for at least 1 hour a day. Unless your life is really difficult, then you should meditate for 2 hours every day. And it's a missed opportunity too if we do that, because the difficult times are really, they're the most fruitful times. That's when this alchemical process becomes more available. It's like when it's difficult. When you sit down and it's really hard and you just want to get up and you endure, you persevere, you have faith, you're patient with it. Yeah, there all kinds of transformation. Kind of the first thing that happens is that you get through it and you come out and you build confidence. Like, oh, I endured, I got through it. So that gives you confidence for your next sit. But there's also this energetic transformation that takes place there. This Some of these things need to be processed. They need to be worked through. They're trying to process through. And if we keep turning away from the difficulty or keep dropping the things, they won't process and they'll keep coming up, keep coming up, keep coming up, keep coming up. And sometimes the difficulty is the catalyst for those things to come out, for those things to come up. And so we sit and we endure, we're patient, and we allow that process to unfold. And it's a very natural thing. It's a very natural thing to turn away from the things that are difficult or not easy to face. And we don't every time there's a difficulty, we don't have to face it. Sometimes we don't have the capacity for it. But one of the benefits of our practice is we build more and more capacity for it. Because our practice is a training. It's a training, and training's not easy. I don't know of one training that's easy. Like we train, we work, we do the work. And so we're training ourselves to turn towards the difficult, to build capacity. And the difficulty almost becomes an ally. It's really interesting how that transforms. I know there's a Tibetan practice, or maybe it's a Zen, probably a Zen practice, where they ask for more difficulty, like they want it. It's like instead of waking up and saying, "May this day be peaceful and joyful," and it's like, "May this day bring difficulty so that it can be processed through, and I can come out on the other side," kind of thing. So there's this blessing in the difficulty. So it's just some couple things here, and I can open up. Like I said, I would. But one of my favorite instructions for practice of patience is from Dogen. And Dogen's this, he brought Soto Zen to Japan. This incredibly kind of a genius, a Buddhist genius, I would say. Kind of, he transformed Buddhism in many ways. But it's so, he's so simple. He's so simple. And so Dogen's practice suggestions. Reduce your practice of patience to two simple practices. The first one is just keep going, no matter what happens. That's it. That's the first one. And then the second one is be of benefit to others. And if it's not of benefit, don't do it. That's it. Those are the two things. Nothing super special, nothing entertaining about that. But try it. Sit down and keep going no matter what happens until the rings. Try it out. And as you're moving through life, be of benefit to others. And if it's not of benefit to others, don't do it. Yeah, just try that on, see what happens. Another really great practice for patience is the practice of Tonglen. And so Tonglen is um, it translates as giving and taking. Some people say giving and receiving, but I like giving and taking better, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But basically, what we do is, you sit and you think of somebody who's suffering, and then you take their suffering, and you kind of see it as the visualizations. You see it as like gray smoke usually. You take it in, take it. It goes into you. It transforms, and then you breathe back into the person light or whatever symbolizes purification to you into that person, and you just keep doing that. And it has this really interesting effect on you because the last thing we want to do is take on somebody else's suffering. The mind, the ego is like, no, I don't want to do that. Like, why would I? No, no, stay away. And so there's this process of patiently doing this, but then also this kind of self-importance being able to like go away. It's really beautiful, beautiful practice. Something else I like to do is just chanting and mantra recitation, which we haven't done here much, but we'll start to do it soon on Thursday nights. I'm going to start doing a chanting class because the chanting and mantra recitation is really important for me in my practice. Sometimes when things are really difficult in a sit or something, I just chant the whole time, and it just allows things to move. Yeah. I have so many. I wrote just like every quote I could find about patience on this piece of paper. I'm not going to read them all, but I'll read a couple of them. So this is Tokmei Zongpo from the 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva. It says, for bodhisattvas who want to be rich in virtue, a person who hurts you is a precious treasure. Cultivate patience from everyone without irritation or resentment. This is the practice of the bodhisattva. This is from the Prajnaparamita Sutra in 8,000 lines. I'm not going to read all 8,000. I'm only going to read four. When he hears someone speaking to him harshly, sorry about the gendered language, when he hears someone speaking to him harshly and offensively, the wise bodhisattva remains quiet, at ease, and contented. She thinks, who speaks? Who hears? How? To whom? By whom? The discerning is then devoted to the foremost perfection of patience. This is a really interesting practice. So if you find yourself getting triggered or bothered by someone or something, ask yourself, who's bothered? What's bothered? What's experiencing this right now? Yeah. And that'll lead you to all kinds of interesting places. Even in meditation, when the thoughts come up or irritation comes up, it's like, what's irritated? Who's irritated? Yeah. Okay. I'll just end there. Thank you all for listening. And we'll just open up for some questions, some discussion. If anybody has anything to say. Sure. Oh, wait, yeah, yeah. Sorry, the microphone needs to come. Well, the Zoom people need to hear, will can only hear through the microphone.
I don't like microphones. Yeah, I know, I'm just teasing. So when you say who's bothered, so when you say who's bothered, when you're sitting with that, when you're feeling some tension, some irritation, let's say it's a conversation that you're having, and when you respond, we ask ourselves, who's bothered? So is that us giving away ourselves? Or help me to understand that.
Well, if you were, you can keep the microphone. So if you were to ask yourself who's bothered, what would your answer be? Okay. So what's the me?
My emotion, feeling. So I would say me, my emotion, I'm feeling so much frustration. It's every cell in my body. It's me.
So it's an arising of emotion.
Yes.
Where's the me in that?
Taking ownership of your emotions.
You own your emotions, or are they just coming up?
That's a great question. They're just coming up.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So are the emotions you?
No. So trying to transform that.
So who's frustrated?
My
Hey,
emotion.
Adam.
Yes.
This is Robin on Zoom. We are having a really hard time hearing you and whoever's asking the question.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can
Yeah,
you?
yeah, it's much
Okay.
better. Thank you.
Huh? Do you want to continue? Is that helpful? Okay. So the inquiry will, that's the inquiry we want, because what usually happens is our thoughts and our emotions, we misplace as being who we are. So when I ask myself who's frustrated or who's experiencing this right now, that's what comes up is like, it's because if they were you, if you had any control over them, you could control them not coming up. So they're just arising because of causes and conditions or patterns that are arising. So when we notice that the emotions are rising or the thoughts are rising or the frustration or whatever is arising, but there's something else there. And so what we notice is that there's not just the emotion arising, but there's a knowing of the emotion, or there's a knowing of the frustration, there's a knowing of the thought. So is that knowing frustrated? So there's a seeing, there's a knowing of the frustration, there's a knowing of the emotion, there's a knowing of this thing. So this part, this awareness, I like to call it the knowing or the awareness, isn't affected by that. And so we start to identify more with the knowing and the awareness rather than the emotion. Then then we start to see that we aren't that emotion. And so it arises within a bigger space. And so the reactivity that could come up when we are completely identified with the emotion doesn't arise in the same way. So we feel it arise, and then we can start to choose how we respond. And that's when we move from reactivity into responsiveness, or reactivity to a skillful response, into more skillfulness. So this is what we're training. This is what we're training. And so it's just kind of creating some separation between the identification with something and then the knowing of that thing, if that makes more sense. Yeah. So that's where that inquiry takes us. Like, who is experiencing this? What is experiencing this? Uh, yeah, that's the inquiry. Yeah. But it's one thing to know that, like I can know that, but then not experience it. So the inquiry needs to happen because it has to be experienced and felt. Like I can say that all day, and we can all say that all day, but until you really have the realization that you're separate from the emotion, then so that's why we practice it. Yeah.
Okay, this is Jen from the meditation hall. If there's someone on Zoom, please speak up because I can't quite see the hands. And we try to alternate questions and comments from live audience and Zoom audience.
Yeah. Ray, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Adam. I've heard a lot about you. This is my first time
Hey, Ray.
being a part of your Sangha. You actually taught at the Rockland Sangha, which I'm a member of, but I missed the night you were there.
Oh, well, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I recently participated in a Mahayana teachings out of the Bay Area, and which was it was an eye-opening experience because their approach and the way the teachings were framed were fresh to me. I had never heard them spoken in that way. And patience, as you're talking about the paramitas, the perfections, were the topic of the teachings. And so when the word patience was being taught and discussed along with perseverance, the word joyful exertion was used in place of perseverance. And it added a perspective that you're speaking of in the teachings tonight when you talk about once the skillful means of the practice are developed, you kind of have this yearning for the suffering, the difficulty, because you've gained the trust in the practice. And I guess the reason I bring it up because we spend a lot of time talking about suffering, which of course that's what the Buddha taught about, but Buddha also taught a lot about joy. And I thought it very enlightening to finally understand the perspective of how joyful exertion, if you will, can overcome the concept of perseverance, or that hard work, grind it out, get it done, and add a little joy to it. And I'll say you helped me have a a more further understanding of that perspective. So I want to say thank you. And then the other thing I wanted to
Thank you,
comment
Ray.
on is ask and it is given talks about well-being that is always available to us, and the resistance that we have to it. And some things are a lot more difficult to find well-being in when we're suffering, and other things we can convert it fairly simply. And that practice has helped me, in the morning, for example, usually I can wake up and have this kind of I don't know, uneasiness about the day. And as soon as I hit the cushion and, get my meditation in, I've been transformed. It's like shape shifting has occurred.
Yeah.
That's fairly easy to do. That's one of the things that gives me my commitment to stay with my daily practice. But on the other hand, if you have a death in the family or something that's really, really hard on your heart, um, the book Asked and It Is Given talks about, the need to, um, have an appreciation list, you know, things that you're grateful for. And just as you talked about in I don't know how to pronounce it, I think you called it Tonglen teachings,
Yeah.
where you're asking to take on the suffering of others. In this ask and it is given, you can just keep an idea or keep your mind on the things you're grateful for, and more and more and more, you begin to have that feeling of well-being flowing into you rather than the sorrow of the suffering that you're enduring. And anything that's like a death or something is going to take time. It may take up to a month or so to start to convert that feeling. But it's another way to approach that.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I think that's healthy. Uh, you know, a shadow of that is um is bypassing suffering or bypassing pain. So we can have, there can be, because, joy is sort of kind of mischaracterized as like this exuberance, this like saccharine, like over happiness. But joy is actually a really deep kind of contentment with the way things are, like an okayness with things, with the circumstances of life. And so, and that kind of joy for sure, because there's this acceptance of the way things are, which is another kind of uh, translation of Kanti, patience. Um, but I think it's really helpful for sure to, always, keep as it said, an attitude of gratitude. But I think sometimes in spirituality, we can kind of get caught in this like good vibes only type thing, or in this kind of uh, uh, passing over suffering, which is another way of avoidance or aversion, like dressed up in like in in uh, in like colorful clothing. So I think you're definitely right. Like a perspective of gratitude and joy is really helpful, but we just want to be careful that we're and mindful and be skillful about that we're not bypassing what needs to be looked at and really feeling. I've lost close family members, both my parents, and my experience with the practice is that the pain's still there. I still feel it right now that I'm talking about it, but the relationship and the perspective has shifted. It's like the practice, when I was experiencing the pain, the practice sort of rose up to meet me. So I didn't fall as far as I would have if I didn't have the practice. And so it becomes, and then another aspect of it is like, it doesn't become all about me. I think that that's one of the things I've seen is that we make somebody else's passing or something that's really not about us. And so that
Mm.
adds another whole other layer of suffering that's doesn't need to be there. So when that's not there, then the experience is much different. It can process much differently too.
Understood.
But yeah,
Thank
I
you.
appreciate your reflection.
Okay, we have a question from the hall.
Hi, Adam.
Hello.
Hello. I have a question related. I mean, I want to check on my understanding and also ask you for some practical approach, in relation to patients. The the place, I'm right now in my work with Buddhist teachings. It seems to me they are very clear analytical tools that are laid on the table, and it seems for me that it's our job to take those tools that can be seen, by the mind in how to say, in a sequence. Look at this parameter, look at that parameter, look at this quality, that quality. However, in action, they seem to come all together, like the face of a gem, the different facets. And you mentioned Dogen. For him, practice is enlightenment, is now. Like enlightenment is not after, this step, you do this step and that step, it's here.
Mhm.
Now, practice is enlightenment, enlightenment is practice. So the challenge for me with the Buddhist teaching is to create articulation, to take those steps and to create something that can be very articulate and very alive, like a multidimensional thing that is alive and is vibrant. So my question is how to connect this patience, the one quality, the cultivation of it, with the two first qualities of the Eightfold Path, with the right view and the right intention. So what I'm trying to say, how to put it in perspective, because this is not patience for the sake of patience, it's patience in relation to some other things. That's my question,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, I think you see in all of the lists of the Buddha that they're not sequential. They're all kind of interwoven. Um, and like I always say, they're all just ways of seeing and they're practices. So I don't think there's like a grand schema of all of these things working together in a particular way. But I think patience is is sort of in every one of them because right view takes time, right mindfulness takes time, right samadhi takes time. Uh, it all kind of takes some it all takes a little bit of patience. So I don't know if that's helpful, but if I'm necessarily answering your question.
Yes, my question in relation to practice, I wanted to make it practical, and I'm not sure what came to me was to bring patient in relation to a goal with the right intention. Basically, the intention to, how to say, to diminish unnecessary suffering for myself and others. For example, you mentioned Dogen again. With keep going and try to be of service to others again. So basically, my attempt was to ask you from your experience, how do you connect like one thing and make it part of a chain or something that it's beginning to work and to express itself in a multidimensional whatever way. And for me, this is what came tonight, the right view and the right intention. And I wanted to check that with you and also ask how your experience is to take one tool and make it vibrant, part of a larger whole.
Hmm. I just think patience is involved in every one of them. So and for me that's something I'm constantly working with, like constantly. Every line I stand in, every Zoom call I'm on, every meeting I'm in, it's always like, it's always there. And no matter even if I don't want it to be, even sitting in Dharma talks of like teachers I really love, I find myself like, when is this going to be over? It's like, it's like, it's happened. I saw the Dalai Lama once, and it was a 12-hour teaching. And it's like, and I'm just enthralled the whole time. But there was a part of me that was like, all right, just like. So I don't know. It's like something I'm always working with in the car, at a stoplight, like people, like conversations. It's yeah, it's something I'm always working with. Oh, it's 7:30. Do you want to talk afterwards? I mean, ask afterwards, or you sure? Because we gotta wrap it. Oh, you have patience. Okay. All right, let's end with just a little metta dedication of merit. And just actually bringing in some mudita, joy. Joy was brought up, and joy for one another is what mudita is. Joy with being with people who are interested and delving into the depths of their being, their suffering, their awakening, the joy. Being in community, being in sangha. All of our various paths towards waking up. There's not one path. There are as many paths as there are people in this room and on Zoom. So it speaks to your soul, it speaks to your heart. That's the path. Dedicate all the benefit from our time together today to the awakening of all beings. May all beings, without exception, be free from suffering and the conditions of suffering. Thank you all so much for being here. If you have any more questions, I'll be around, and say hi to each other. Maybe talk to somebody you haven't talked to before. Yeah.